Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sky above Gotham City was a murky gray, churning like an angry sea. A storm of unprecedented magnitude was approaching, and even in a city where darkness felt like a permanent resident, there was a heightened sense of dread. From his vantage point in the Batcave, Bruce Wayne stood, rigid, eyes fixed on the multiple screens displaying weather patterns that defied natural explanation. The storm system had formed too quickly, and its intensity was growing by the hour. Buildings were being reinforced, emergency shelters were filling up, and the city was preparing for the worst, but Bruce knew something more sinister was at play. The Batcomputer beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. His suspicions were confirmed as he ran the latest atmospheric data. The storm wasn't just a freak of nature. Someone was controlling it. He turned sharply, his cape rustling against the cool cavern floor. "Alfred," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "The storm there? Something wrong?" "Sounded perfect." Alfred Pennyworth, standing with his usual poised demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "Perfect, sir." Bruce's face darkened. "No storm forms this way. It's not like it's being directed right at Gotham." Alfred's brow furrowed. Any indication of who might be responsible? "Not yet," Bruce replied. "But I have a feeling we're dealing with more than just bad weather." Just as Bruce was about to suit up, an alert flashed across the Batcomputer screen. Central City had issued a similar warning: severe weather anomalies spreading across the eastern seaboard. It was too much of a coincidence, and one name immediately came to Bruce's mind: the Weather Wizard. He had faced the Rogue once before, but the villain had primarily targeted the Flash. Bruce opened a secure communication line, knowing that he needed help from someone faster than him, literally. As he typed in the encrypted codes, the screen blinked and revealed the familiar face of Barry Allen, aka the Flash. The hero's unusually cheerful expression was notably absent, replaced with a look of concern. "Batman, I've been monitoring the storm from here," Barry said without preamble. "This is bad, real bad." "I've seen the reports," Bruce replied, his tone clipped. "This storm, there's more to it, right?" Barry nodded, his features tight with focus. "I've been tracking it for a few hours now. The speed, the pattern, it's unnatural. I am betting the Weather Wizard is behind it. It's been quiet lately, but should be the first time she's tried something like this." "Gotham says in the direct path," Bruce said. "I could use your help." Barry didn't hesitate. "I will be there in a flash." A crackle of static followed, and the screen went dark. Bruce allowed himself a brief moment of relief. If anyone could help turn the tide of this disaster, it was the Flash. By the time the Flash arrived, Gotham was already feeling the brunt of the storm. Streets that had been eerily quiet a few hours earlier were now engulfed in chaos. The wind howled like a living creature, tearing through buildings and uprooting trees. Sheets of rain pounded the pavement with a force that felt like bullets. Most of the city was hunkered down, but the storm was so fierce that shelters were quickly being overwhelmed. Barry, in his iconic red suit, appeared in a blur of motion beside Batman, who had just stepped out of the Batmobile. Despite the downpour, Barry barely seemed wet, his speed generating a slight blur that kept the worst of the storm at bay. "It's the worse than I thought," Barry said, his voice raised over the wind. "This isn't just random weather manipulation. It's coordinated." Batman's gaze scanned the skies, lightning flashing in rapid succession. "The Weather Wizard has upgraded his tech. This storm started to overwhelm Gotham, and he's doing a damn good job of it." Barry muttered. "Any idea where he's holed up?" Batman pulled a device from his belt, tapping into the city's surveillance and atmospheric data feed. A 3D map of Gotham flickered to life, showing the city's power grid and weather pattern. "There," Batman said, pointing to the map, "the storm's intensity is strongest around the financial district. That's south, where we'll find him." Barry nodded. "Then, As they made their way through the storm-ravaged streets, Barry couldn't help but glance over at the Dark Knight. Batman was, as always, an enigma, a brooding figure of focus and determination. Barry had worked with him before, but their styles couldn't truly be more different. Where Barry relied on speed and quick thinking, Batman was methodical, precise, always 2 steps ahead. They were both heroes, but the way they carried that mantle was worlds apart. Despite their differences, there was one thing Barry knew for sure. If anyone could figure out how to stop the Weather Wizard, it was Batman. The financial district of Gotham had been reduced to a war zone. Skyscrapers trembled under the force of the wind and debris littered the street. The storm had knocked out the power grid, leaving the city cloaked in a near-apocalyptic darkness, punctuated only by the flashes of lightning. Batman and the Flash moved quickly, evading falling signs and collapsing awnings as they approached the epicenter of the storm. Barry's speed allowed him to zip through the chaos, rescuing civilians trapped under debris or in danger of being swept away by floodwater. Meanwhile, Batman took the lead in analyzing the situation, his mind racing through possible strategy. They found the weather wizard sitting out inside one of Gotham's tallest buildings, perched at the top where the storm raged most intensely. It was no coincidence he had set up his equipment to amplify the storm's power, using the high altitude to his advantage. As they approached the entrance, Barry skidded to a halt. Okay, so how do we do this? We go in fast, take him down, and shut off whatever he's using to control the storm. Batman's jaw clenched. It wouldn't be that simple. We can't risk causing more damage to the equipment. We need to disarm it without triggering any fail-safes. Otherwise, the storm could intensify. Barry looked up at the sky, the clouds swirling like a malevolent vortex. No pressure. Without another word, they entered the building. The interior was a wrecked, shattered glass, overturned desks, and walls that looked like they had been blasted by gale-force wind. They climbed the stairs, their every step accompanied by the rumble of thunder. As they reached the top floor, the storm's intensity became almost unbearable. The roof had been partially torn away, leaving the control room exposed to the elements. There, at the center of it all, stood the weather wizard. He was dressed in his usual green and yellow garb, but his equipment had undergone a serious upgrade. Massive generators hummed with energy, their cables snaking across the floor like the roots of some malevolent tree. Lightning crackled in the air around him, feeding directly into the machines that powered the storm. Batman Flash, the weather wizard, sneered, his voice barely audible over the wind. I knew you'd come, but you too late. Gotham will drown. Barry was about to charge forward when Batman held up a hand, stopping him. Not yet, Batman murmured. We need to disable the generators first. The weather wizard's grin widened. Go ahead and try. I've built this system to withstand anything, even your precious gadgets, Batman. Barry shifted on his feet, his impatience visible. We don't have time for this. Every second we wait, more people are at risk. Batman didn't respond. His mind was already working through the variables, the layout of the room, the structure of the generators, and the timing of the lightning strikes. There had to be a weakness, something they could exploit. Then he saw it. Batman's sharp eyes darted around the room, scanning every inch of the exposed rooftop where the weather wizard stood, surrounded by his chaotic machinery. The cables connecting the generators were thick and heavily insulated, but there near the base of the largest machine was a cluster of power conduits that were unprotected. If they could disable that, it might bring the whole system down. Barry, Batman said quietly, stepping forward, I need you to draw his attention. The Flash glanced at him, then back at the weather wizard, who was now pacing confidently in front of the storm generators. You've got a plan. I always do. Barry nodded, his body tensing, ready to spring into action. In the blink of an eye, the Flash launched forward, a streak of red cutting through the rain, and debris racing straight toward the weather wizard. The villain's reaction was immediate. With a flick of his wrist, a bolt of lightning erupted from the storm, crashing down in front of Barry. The Flash dodged it with ease, zigzagging toward his target. Another bolt followed, then another, as the weather wizard focused all his energy on stopping the scarlet blur that darted around him. Is it all you've got? Barry called out, his voice barely audible over the deafening roar of the wind. The weather wizard sneered, raising both arms. I'll turn you to ash before you even get close. As the villain unleashed a torrent of lightning, Batman took his chance. Moving with silent precision, he slipped behind the machinery, making his way toward the exposed power conduit. The rain hammered down on him, but he pushed forward, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The Flash continued to taunt the weather wizard, pushing his speed to the limit as he danced around the bolts of lightning. He could feel the storm's intensity growing, the air crackling with energy, but he trusted Batman to handle the rest. All he had to do was keep the weather wizard distracted long enough. Finally, Batman reached the cluster of conduits. He crouched down, pulling out a set of tools from his utility belt. His fingers moved swiftly, bypassing the protective mechanisms that the weather wizard had installed. Sparks flew as he carefully cut through the wires, rerouting the power away from the generator. The storm above them flickered momentarily, the winds faltering for a brief second. But the weather wizard wasn't all and done yet. He turned sharply, realizing too late that Batman had sabotaged his equipment. No, he roared, his voice filled with fury. He raised his arms, summoning all the remaining energy in the storm, directing it toward the generators in a desperate attempt to regain control. The Flash saw the shift in the weather wizard's focus and knew this was the moment. Without hesitation, he sped toward the villain, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Before the weather wizard could react, Barry tackled him, sending both of them crashing to the ground. The impact knocked the weather wizard's sand control rod out of his hand, sending it skidding across the floor. The moment the rod was out of his grasp, the storm above them began to weaken. The lightning slowed, the winds died down, and the rain became a steady drizzle instead of the torrential downpour it had been moments before. Panting, the Flash stood over the weather wizard, who groaned in defeat. Batman emerged from behind the generators, his cape billowing in the now gentle breeze. "God, it's over," Batman said, his voice cold and unyielding. The weather wizard struggled to sit up, his face twisted in rage. "You think this is over, Batman? You can stop the storm. Gotham will drown." Batman stepped forward, looming over the fallen villain. "You've lost control of the storm. It's dissipating." The weather wizard's eyes flickered with panic as he looked toward the sky. The storm that had once threatened to destroy Gotham was finally subsiding. The Flash reached down and pulled the weather wizard to his feet, securing him with a pair of high-tech restraints from Batman's utility belt. "You're going to have a nice long stay in Arkham," Barry said, his tone laced with satisfaction. The weather wizard glared at him, but his defiance had crumbled. The storm was over, and so was his plan. Together, Batman and the Flash escorted the weather wizard back down to the streets of Gotham, where emergency crews were already beginning the process of cleaning up the wreckage. The damage to the city was extensive: flooded streets, collapsed buildings, and thousands of displaced citizens. But thanks to their efforts, the worst had been avoided. As they approached the Batmobile, Barry glanced at Bruce. "Not bad for a team-up, huh?" Batman didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the city as the first rays of sunlight began to break through the cloud. He had always worked alone, carrying the weight of Gotham on his shoulders without relying on others. But today had been different. He had needed help, and the Flash had been there to provide it. "You did good," Batman finally said, his voice low, but sincere. Barry grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the city began to recover. The people of Gotham were resilient, and despite the damage, they would rebuild. They always did. Barry was the first to break the silence. "I always figured you'd be the last person to call for backup. But I guess even Batman can't handle everything on his own." Batman turned to him, his expression unreadable. "There are some battles you can fight alone." Barry nodded, his grin softening into a smile. "Well, if you ever need a hand again, you know where to find me." With a quick salute, the Flash sped off, a blur of red disappearing into the distance. Batman watched him go, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The storm had passed, but the challenges ahead would be many. Gotham would always need its protector, and Bruce Wayne was ready to answer the call alone or with help when necessary. He climbed into the Batmobile, the engine roaring to life as he prepared to head back to the Batcave. There would be no rest for him tonight. There rarely was, but for now, the city was safe, and that was enough. As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, his thoughts drifted to the conversation he'd had with Barry. Vulnerability was something he rarely allowed himself to feel, let alone admit. But today had been a reminder that even the strongest among them had their limit. And while he would never fully abandon his solitary approach, perhaps there was value in having someone else by his side. The Batmobile's headlights cut through the fading mist, illuminating the road ahead. Gotham's skyline loomed in the distance, dark and imposing, but no longer under the shadow of the storm. The city would recover as it always did, and Batman would be there watching over it, as he always had. The clouds continued to part, revealing a sliver of stars above. For the first time in hours, the air felt calm, peaceful, even. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Bruce Wayne allowed himself a single thought. Maybe there were some storms he didn't have to face alone.